I was born in Pennsylvania, but I grew up mostly in Virginia. And then when I graduated high school, I moved down to the deep south. So I was in South Carolina and I was in Georgia. And then coming up about 3 years ago, I got the itch. I packed my life into a few bags and just came to the city to do comedy. I'm just kind of dumb for not realizing it earlier. I started at 23. I'm 26 now. But I should have probably realized that about 18. But when I was in high school, I really admired George Carlin. And he had a new HBO special come on every 2 years. So every 2 years, I'd watch HBO and I'd watch his new special. And that's who made me want to do it. And then I saw guys like Bill Burr and Louis C.K. and Patton Oswalt, and they kind of like more of my today's generation's voice. And that really made me want to do it, probably the most. So I lived in Savannah, Georgia, and there was an open mic there. But have you ever seen the movie Tombstone? There's a scene in the movie Tombstone where this like traveling, like vaudevillian type of Shakespeare play comes into the town, and they're all performing Shakespeare to these degenerate people, these Westerners, these outlaws. And during their performances, they're just shooting guns at them, like dance for me, dance for me. And for some reason, that's what I thought comedy in the South would be. So I actually moved to New York to start. I started here. It was amazing. Like I never been here before. So when I landed, I was kind of overwhelming at first. But then I just started going to open mics and started just doing it up. And then eventually I got enough material and enough jokes to where I went to bar shows. So now I still do a lot of bar shows. I produce my own bar show. I perform at the Comic Strip live. That's the club that I do. I do late night spots there. And yeah, I'm kind of inching my way. I don't know if I've been doing it long enough to become bitter yet. But I know bitter comics. To me, I think I have to believe that the cream rises to the top. I have to believe that if you work hard enough and you keep at it and you get good, you will eventually get what you deserve. It might take a long time. I think I heard Mark Maron once say it takes 10 years to create an overnight sensation, or to become an overnight sensation. And that's kind of what I'm subscribing to. I'm kind of in it for the long haul. If I don't make it in 15, 20 years, I'm still going to be doing it. That's a promise I made to myself. It's a great place. It's the only microbrewery in Manhattan. And great beer, great people. It was just a lot of hours, too. Like, I was on my feet a lot as a waiter. And I actually met my boss, my current boss, who owns a tour company. And he also does comedy. So he thought it'd be a natural fit, a guy who knew beer and a guy who talked to people in comedy. So now I do guided tours throughout the city. With beer and breweries and stuff like that, and it's a big hit. The beer and brewery tour is doing really well. Well, the dream job would be at the Comedy Cellar and that kind of thing. But I have to say, for as many comics as I know who have grueling day jobs behind desks, I'm very lucky. I have a really cool job, and it's a job that also gives me some performing chops. I have to entertain 25 to 30 people every Saturday on this beer tour, and that has a lot to do with stand-up skills and a hosting skill, really. And so I'm very fortunate to have this gig. Yeah, it's good. I think comedy is doing very well now. I feel like a lot of people who are above me are getting a lot of opportunities to have TV shows and writing gigs and stuff. I feel like it's headed in a very good direction. And I don't feel like there's going to be a bottoming out like there was when the comedy kind of collapsed in the 90s, because there are a lot of comics now, but I feel like today it's harder to get on stage. It's harder to get seen by the people, whereas I feel like in the 90s they were like they're just throwing comics on stage, and a lot of them weren't very good, and I feel like people kind of moved away from that. And also people have DVRs at home, and they have constant entertainment, so if they're at a show, chances are they want to be there. I feel like it's very indicative of New York being almost the center of comedy in the United States, and I know that sounds very arrogant because I'm here, and there's people in Chicago and people in LA are like, what about us? But in the 70s, The Tonight Show left because New York was a dump. It was a slum and the financial crisis and everything like that. And it was kind of a city of yesterday. Now The Tonight Show is moving back, and I think that's indicative of how big New York is. And as a comic, it's exciting that there's going to be, Letterman's going to be here, The Tonight Show's going to be here, Late Night with Seth Meyers is going to be here. Of course, SNL has always been here. I think it's kind of indicative of how New York's really almost the center of comedy in the United States. And I feel like for stand-up, it's the mecca of stand-up comedy, because this is where you can get on stage the most, and this is where your audiences are always diverse. You get in front of a group of people they could be any group of people. They're in New York, where if you go out of town in the Midwest, you might have an audience that's comprised of almost the same people. It's almost like a hive-minded crowd. Where here in New York, there's so many different sentiments that you have to appeal to. So it's almost like running with weights on when you're performing in front of these audiences. So when you get out of the city, and I did a show in Martinsburg, West Virginia, in front of a bunch of Martinsburg, West Virginians, whatever you want to call them, and it went really well. The jokes landed pretty hard, and it was almost surprising how almost effortless it was. And I'm not saying that because I am good. It just I feel like the audiences in New York they really test you. If a joke works here, it probably worked most places. There's some few cliche evidence cliche advice that I've heard, but it's very poignant. One of them is keep your eyes on your own paper. You're going to become bitter and tired and jaded if you're constantly looking at what other people are getting and what they're doing and why aren't I getting that? Why aren't I getting it? If you just focus on the work and you put your work in and you get good and you perform your craft well, you're going to get the opportunities. So one of them is keep your eyes on your own paper. The other one is just don't be an asshole to anybody. Because you never know who people are. And I'm not saying be nice to try to get something out of people, but if you work hard and you just stay nice and no one thinks that you're a bad person or a jerk, you're going to get booked on more stuff. It's just the way it is. Now there's so many comedians. There's so many different venues. There's so many different there's so much stage time. There's really no reason to book someone who you don't like. Like I feel like back in the 90s and before the internet and before there was so much exposure of people, you really kind of had to book the pain in the ass people, but they're kind of going away now. They're being blackballed because there's no reason to deal with things if you don't have to. There's a lot of talented people in the city. So be nice, work hard. The cream rises to the top. That's the cliche, I guess, that I'm going with here. I'm kind of a comedy nerd. One of the other tours I do is a history of comedy tour, and I like to watch old comedy. I like to watch old movies. I love movies. I like to kind of explore different. I watched this movie, The Apartment, the other day. It's a very famous movie, Shirley MacLaine and Jack Lemmon. And just like watching old stuff like that is so amazing because that movie is completely about sex. The whole movie is about the guy renting out his apartment to his coworkers for sex. But there's not one sex scene, there's not one curse word. And it's almost beautiful the way that they had to write movies back then. And it's just really smart. So I enjoy that. I go to the movies a lot. Listen to podcasts, any type of comedy. At this point, I'm a sponge. I try to take in as much information as possible. If I hear two comics talking on a podcast and I get to be a fly in the wall and hear them talk about comedy, to me, I just eat that up. That's perfect for me.